Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Issues of the Heart podcast. I'm your host, Brother Kobe.
I'm Rogers.
And we have a special guest today, Pastor Peter Chung. We're glad to have you on. And to share some of your insights to some of the pertinent things that's going on today, I'm going to give you an opportunity to share some of your background to the issues that we're going to discuss concerning the religious liberty. You know, why the separation of church and state, and are some of the things that we're seeing in the government, are they stepping stones to the fulfillment of Revelation 13 with the mark of the beast and so forth? So just to get started, if you want to share some of your background information.
Oh, yes. Thank you so much for having me, Brother Kobe, Pastor Blue. It's nice to be here with you all.
Thanks for joining.
My quick background, just a quick summary of my bio. I'm an advanced placement U.S. history and advanced placement U.S. government teacher at a Seventh Adventist high school in near Los Angeles, California. And that's what I do. I'm a historian and not really in pastoral ministry anymore, but as a teacher right now.
Amen. So we want to kind of get into that. What are some of the foundations, because people need to get a clear understanding and indication for religious liberty, because sometimes people may feel like their liberties are being infringed upon when in reality it may not be. Certain things may be the right of the state to issue, and I think to have some clarity on that will be good. But can you share with us why is it important to have religious liberty? What's the importance of the separation of church and state?
Well, I think that the source of religious liberty and the source of actually the separation of church and state is found in the Bible. And even during the time of Judah, during the time of ancient Israel, when Judah was a kingdom, believe it or not, they had a form of separation of church and state. In fact, the Bible says in 2 Chronicles chapter 19, verse 11, the Bible says, "And behold, Amariah, the chief priest, was over you in all the matters of the Lord." So the chief priest, religious, matters of the Lord. "And Zebediah, the son of Ishmael, the ruler of the house of Judah, for all the king's matters." So you had a separation. You had the priest over the matters of the Lord, and the rulers of the house of Judah, political powers, over the matters of the kingdom or the nation, which is political. So even in the time of Judah, there was a form of separation of church and state. And you can also find that in 2 Chronicles chapter 26, verse 18, where King Uzziah sought to go into the sanctuary or the temple to burn incense upon the Lord, when the high priest said that is not your role. You are a political function. It is our job as a priest to do that. He went so and did it anyway, and God struck him with leprosy, and leprosy is a type of sin. So you see in the Old Testament examples of separation of church and state. In the New Testament, Jesus says, "My kingdom is not of this world," John 18:36. "If my kingdom were of this world, then would my servants fight." So Jesus is saying, my kingdom is not on earth. If I was a political power, then I would have a military and army to further my agenda. But Jesus said, my kingdom is not of this world. Also in Matthew 22, verse 21, Jesus says, "Render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, unto God the things that are God." So there's a sphere for Caesar or the government, civil power. And then there's a realm that Caesar should not intrude to, which is the realm of religion, which is God. And then in Romans chapter 13, verses 3-6, I'm going to just summarize it. You could go on and read it yourselves. The role of civil government is to maintain order, because not everyone's going to be bound by the gospel. Not everybody's going to be bound by religion. And so you need a governmental power to punish for murder, for stealing, because natural human nature is to do those things when there's no restrictions. So the role of civil power is to maintain order, because if you do not have laws that punish, then society will devolve into chaos and will kill each other. And so the matters of religion is the realm of the religious groups and churches and religions, and the realm of civil order is the realm of government. So that's from the Bible. The Constitution and the First Amendment gives us what separation of church and state is. You have what's called the Establishment Clause, which is Congress shall not establish a religion. So in other words, we do not have a national church in the United States. Now, in certain nations like Great Britain, you have a national church, the Anglican Church, which is headed by the king or the queen or the sovereign of that nation and is supported by taxes. But here in the United States, we do not have a national church. We're forbidden to have that. And also, another aspect of it is the Free Exercise Clause, which states that the government cannot restrict the free expression of religion. So that's the separation of church and state in a nutshell, both from the Constitution and from the Bible.
All right. Now, Baloo, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, so when you mentioned two important things, I think we should just grab hold of the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause and the importance of it. Because there's some people today who look at that and would say, hey, we need to make sure that the church runs the state. And there are a lot of people who say that, but there are some people who have that view. And they feel that, well, if the state has good laws and so forth, the church has good laws, then why not let the state implement those things? You mentioned the basis of government. The government is given to be able to protect the folks, to be able to rule over people, to execute judgments. In fact, Romans 13, you talked about, it calls these servants ministers. And so there's one thing that people typically don't think about, but really, like, hey, a judge is a minister, a sheriff is a minister, a police officer is a minister, firefighters a minister, and so forth, because there are people who will obey the law from even without it being written as such, because of their duty as Christians, their obligation, their love for God, love for other people. And there's some people who care less about it. And so the law then stands as a buffer to say, well, hey, you may not respect the commandments, but if you steal, you're going to go to jail for, whatever, or pay this penalty, et cetera. So my question I would ask then, for those who would equivocate and say that we should have the state to follow the instructions of the church should have a stronger say-so, because we've removed ourselves away from God, and you can see some of the immorality in society and so forth. We should have a strong appeal to make the church or to allow the church to push things through the state. What would you say to that, to someone who would present that point of view, that hey, what if they're good laws that the church is trying to get people to do? Shouldn't the church have a say-so in the governance of society?
Well, we've seen an example of that in American history in the colonial period, where you had a group called the Puritans that sought to purify the Church of England from all influence of the papacy, and they were persecuted, and they came to the United States, or they came to North America before it became the United States. However, what they did, though, even though they were persecuted, was they replicated a church-state system where the church was essentially the government. And so the church was actually the governing power that was in the realm of both civil and also religious oversight. And the result of that was persecution. You had people that were outliners that did not necessarily agree doctrinally with the church that were persecuted. People were accused of being witches, and they were summarily executed. And you had examples of people that disagreed with theology that were banished from the colony. An example of that was a woman named Anne Hutchinson, who was in the Puritan colony in Massachusetts, who believed that women should teach from the Bible. And the church said, no, you can't do that. And she was banished from that society. And because the United States is now a pluralistic society, originally the majority were Christian. And because we have so many diverse religions, to have a preference for one religion would not be to the good order of society from a practical political standpoint.
Well, I know some people would attribute and say, well, the church can still have a say-so in the government because they will say that was the barbarianism of the time. We are more civilized people. We wouldn't repeat those same mistakes. And so they feel comfortable in saying, hey, we as a church, we should have more of a religious say so in the government, and having the government to do certain things because, look at society. Because, you know, the, the government is not enforcing certain things, society is run awry. So we have all these crazy things going on. So there is a need to then enforce certain religious views on the people, because our society is becoming to what atheistic in its actions. So what do you say to that?
I'll give you an example for that. Are those Christians that want to use government to further our beliefs to the nation comfortable in accommodating, allowing Buddhists to do the same and Muslims to do the same? Would they have equal privileges as the Christian in America today? Because quite frankly, if you look at Buddhist societies, in some nations, they're well ordered. I'll give you an example. Japan. I'm not, by the way, preface, I know I'm Asian, I'm not Japanese. I just want to clarify that. There's that kind of like all Asians look the same. I'm not Japanese, just to clarify. I just want to say that. So I'll give you an example. So when there's a natural disaster in, say, a Christian nation like the United States, quite frank, or even in Europe, or there's a natural disaster or some sort of social unrest, there's a lot of looting and there's a lot of stealing going on.
Mm-hmm.
But like, say, what happened in Japan when the tsunami happened, none of that happened in that society. And it's a naturally, it's a predominantly Buddhist society, Shinto society. It seems like they're working in their religion. Are we going to allow their religion to dictate principles in our nation? Or about the Muslim, Muslims, certain nations, they regulate morality, strict adherence against adultery and fornication. Those are good things religiously. Are we going to allow them to have a say on that? So the question of like religious freedom, my question is this Christian only, or are we accommodating all religions? And so we recently had the Supreme Court decision on that football coach in Seattle, allowing him to pray. He's a public school official hired by the local public school. He's a government employee, to allow to pray in a football game, after a football game. Now, the principle behind this is this. Usually the Supreme Court has decided cases where if you have an authority figure like a teacher in the realm of young students that are impressionable, then we want his religion not to be shown or her religion not to be imposed, because students can be compelled because that person's an authority figure. Now, in governments, like even our United States congressional sessions, we do have chaplains that pray before proceedings. We had it before we saw it live TV when they were certifying the election. We had Pastor Barry Black, he's Seventh Adventist, he sent a chaplain, he prayed from the session of government. What's the difference? Well, the difference is that adults are not impressionable. They already made their decisions. Plus, it's not more of a religious standpoint. It has been a tradition that's been happening in the functions of government since the beginning. So that's the rationale. Now, for the prayer in public schools for that coach, my question is this: would the courts accommodate a Muslim coach doing a Muslim prayer, or a Buddhist from doing a Buddhist prayer? So those are some of the things that we should consider when the Supreme Court decides these things.
So we talk about freedom of religion and so forth. A lot of, and to be specific here, a lot of American, European Christians, i.e., a lot of times, white Christians, from the evangelical churches, we view it through the lens, and I say we because a lot of that, teaching comes through and it's incorporated through Black churches and Hispanic churches and so forth. There's really a belief, either stated subtly or either it is directly, that essentially this is the right way. And so when you start getting to the influence of particular religion, the true impact of what the First Amendment is not only we are promoting a particular religion, but you have the freedom to be away from religion as well. And that's a bitter pill for some people to swallow, that you're really, the true encompassing of that is saying, you have the right to be an atheist. You have the right to be a Muslim. You have the right to be Hindu. You have the right to be Buddhist. You have the right to be a Wiccan, if that's what you want to be. And as a believer, then I will, even though I may not agree with that, I'm going to protect that your right and be able to afford you that right. But when we look at the impact of, well, let's allow this to be, enforced, and we might come together as Christians of various denominations and say, well, hey, we all believe in Jesus, so we want this to be this part taught. But then when you start getting down into the fine pieces of it, then that's where, okay, well, whose particular teaching is going to take the precedent? Whose religion is going to be in the ascendancy? Who's going to take the back seat? So it's like us three saying, well, let's go over and let's go, combine into something. We're going to open up our home and we're going to do this project. And so we could, have people coming over and so forth. But then, folks start coming in, all of a sudden other things pop out from it. All right, well, now it's, are we going to set it at 50 people? I'm like, well, hey, it's 50 people. It's not my place, your place. I don't care how many people come in. You're like, well, no, not 50 going to be up in here. It's going to set it at 10 and people can't come in doing whatever. So you start getting into the nuances of it and so forth. So yes, generally speaking, people say, well, Christianity, well, we expect that. But then you start getting into, well, what about, what if you're not, in terms of doctrinal teaching? What if your teaching allows for this accommodation, but my teaching doesn't allow for that? And so then that's when you begin to get into the other piece you talked about, a persecution. And that's what we see and have seen through the establishment of honoring religions, that essentially, yes, you may start off with a good purpose and good intention, but ultimately, if you don't see eye to eye with me and accept this, then you're going to be the persecuted religion. So it's totally fine if my religion is the one that's in the ascendancy or the majority. But when the shoe is on the other foot and then I'm in the minority, then that's a particular issue and so forth. And so the basis of when we look at the Constitution, the Bill of Rights and so forth, I had been under the impression that essentially it was, Jefferson. I know he was considered to be the father of the Constitution. One of the things you hear it during grade school and so forth, and sometimes in religious circles and so forth, was really, this strong push to be able to break away from the appeals of the abuses that they suffered in Europe under the papal church. But as I was reading in the last few years, some of the teaching that influenced Jefferson was not that of the escape from Catholicism and so forth, but a lot of things that influenced him was his association with a lot of the teachings that were taking place in France and Europe at the time. And so it was really a breaking away from God. And so more than anything, the framework is established to say, hey, don't judge me because I worship a different way or may not go to the tradition of the fathers. And many have just taken that to say, well, look, it's all about this, but the basis of it is, hey, if you don't necessarily believe, even like you talk about, Native Americans and so forth, who don't ascribe to Christianity, are they going to have a fair, a seat at the table to be able to share? I mean, if we're going around the room and say, okay, everybody gets a day to pray. Well, hey, we're all on board when it's, people from your faith and people from your church. But when we get, to the person who is, believes in the spirits and wants to summon the great spirits and so forth. And again, they're just as sincere in their beliefs as you are, I am, and the next person. But then that becomes an issue. Well, no, you can't do that because that does not go along. And so then you start getting into a realm of, well, who's going to be the arbiter of doctrine? Is that the position of the state to be able to define what doctrine is? And so we get into somewhat of a slippery slope, because you can have a lot of people who will try to do some things under the guise of religion. And so the courts have a very precarious situation in trying not to trample upon, actual rights. Like if your right is you believe that, no matter how sick I am, no matter how close to death I am, I'm not going to take a prescribed medicine. Again, that's your personal choice. That's your personal belief. But then what if it's your kid that, that you are responsible for? And the courts have stepped in and say, well, hey, you might choose that as an adult, but your kid really has no, they don't have the wherewithal. You're the guardian and so forth. And so, yeah, maybe you might say, I'm not going to go to the doctor to get some antibiotic to be able to treat this. I'm just going to, grin and bear it and hope for the best, expect the worst, and pray for it. But your child, on the other hand, that's 4 years old, you're putting their life at risk. And so a lot of times people see that then as, okay, this is an encroachment of religion, but it's not an easy job to try to be able to navigate through, to give people freedom to be able to express themselves, and knowing that freedom to express yourself is also the freedom that you can hurt yourself. But I don't necessarily need to interfere with that unless you're crossing over now and you're impacting others. And so again, with that example, maybe, I feel that it's a part of my religion to be able to go around, you don't wear clothes. Well, that may work inside your house, but as soon as you step outside, that's a whole different thing. So now you can't come down and like, well, hey, they getting on me because my religion teaches, you be in the natural world. You don't need to clothe yourself. You can walk around as you are. That's how God made me. If God wanted me to wear clothes, I would have had them when I came out the womb. People can go down that road and not really look at the whole picture. Okay, well, no, you just can't go doing any and everything. There are certain parameters. And so thank you for, for sharing that and sort of laying the framework and the basis for us to be able to move off of.
Now, here's what I want to share about the founding fathers. I mean, you mentioned the founding fathers, Pastor Blue, that many people seem not to understand. You mentioned Jefferson. Jefferson was a deist. A deist is different from a Christian. A deist believes that, God exists, but God is not personally intervening in the affairs of the day-to-day operations of the world. God is just seeing the universe like a clock that's running, and he's just there in the distance watching the clock go. And it's very interesting that Jefferson did travel to France, and France had a lot of these secular humanistic ideas that were brewing that would bear fruit with the French Revolution. And he was heavily influenced by that. And, he was the ambassador for the United States to France, and he was heavily influenced by the thinking of French secular humanists. Another example is Thomas Paine. Thomas Paine was a straight up atheist. He did not believe in God at all. And so to say that all these founding fathers are Christian, or like Bible believing Christians, like evangelical Christians, is not fact. Many were deists, many had different ideas. And in fact, there's a letter that surfaced a few years ago where President Washington actually wrote a letter to a Jewish congregation, I believe it was in Rhode Island, telling them that they would be protected and they would not be persecuted. That he implied through that letter that people of all faiths and different religions should be protected by this nation. And so those were some of the positions of our founding fathers that we forget. And I think that because of the proliferation of misinformation from pundits and social media, I know someone that has a huge following that, is a provocateur, that is provocative. He says all sorts of things that are just not confirmed by historical fact. In fact, I got so frustrated, I challenged him. I said, if you know so much, I challenge you to take the AP US government exam to see if you pass. He actually declined. I mean, we're in that point right now where people will just listen to anything that sounds good. But the fact of the matter is, the founding fathers, many of them were not traditional Christian. And so that's some context in when we read the Constitution, when we read some of the early writings of the founding fathers.
So let me chew on that for a second and to share, just and put it in layman's terms. Again, so what we're saying is that, contrary to popular belief, the setup of the Constitution, excuse me, the setup of the Constitution was not as such that, okay, well, this is divinely ordained with these principles there. What really happened, and God used, don't get me wrong, God used that setup, but it was really about, hey, we are thinking in a different way. If we come here and we begin to get with our experience the way we want to get, that's not about to happen in America. you're talking about the heavy influence of Puritanism. You begin to look at a lot in some of the Quakers and the different religious groups that came over, because again, they're a lot of these religious groups are coming over here because they're looking in the new world that they'll be able to have a little place to be able to carve out. And so when you start talking further later on, you start seeing the different colonies, they all have different religious laws. The church has a heavy hand in the governance there, not the Catholic Church, but these are, the Church of England has heavy influence. The Puritans have heavy influence. Quakers have their settlement and so forth. And so it goes on, Baptists, et cetera. But these fathers are looking and saying, hey, we don't necessarily believe these things, in the traditional sense. And so by allowing this, the openness, they would be able to espouse and to accept their view. I'm not saying that they were looking like, hey, we want to have, not 25 years or 200 years in the road, this future outgrowth, but the whole idea is that, let's not be restricted in religion, because I'm not about to go to the Baptist church. Maybe I may go, but I may not be a believer. I'm not about to go to the Anabaptists. I'm not to go to the Puritans and so forth. But it was that framework, though, that has created the atmosphere that truly we have come to thrive in. That, all right, you may be an atheist, but I'm going to give you that freedom to be an atheist, and I'm going to be a Muslim, and you give me that freedom to be a Muslim. You don't have to worry about getting bombed in your house. I don't have to worry about getting bombed in my house. When I'm trying to run for public office, you can't use religion to be a test of it. But by the same token, then, if you can't use it to be a test, then you're not going to use it to be a test to disqualify, to say, well, all right, this person is a Baptist, they can't run for office and so forth, because they don't subscribe to these particular tenets. It created a framework that we enjoy. So again, it may not have been set for the best purposes, but through it, though, many good things have been the fruit of it. Similar to Joseph going into Egypt. It wasn't God's set up that his brothers would sell him into slavery, but because they did sell him into slavery, and while he was there, his experience, it created an opportunity for him to be able to bring salvation and freedom, not only for his family, but for Egypt and for the world. And so it's a similar parallel in those respects as well.
And I just want to bring up this one point, that there was a church that was instrumental in the development of separation of church and state during the founding fathers period, which was the Baptist church. Now, Baptists by theology, the very nature is baptism by immersion. In other words, the believer will choose to be baptized and choose by their own conscience to be baptized to the faith of that church, as opposed to the other Christians, even the Puritans that were from the Anglican tradition, that comes all the way from the papacy, that if you are an infant, you're sprinkled. You have no choice in the matter. You're sprinkled into the church with infant baptism. And so Baptists believed in that you need to choose to be a Christian and you be baptized. And so Baptists were instrumental in the separation of church and state. And one of the first Baptists, or the founder of the American Baptist Church, was a man who was my personal hero. I'm very biased and 100% biased that he's my hero. His name is Roger Williams. Roger Williams is the one that introduced the whole concept of the separation of church and state in America. Now, I want to go a little prophetic. In Revelation chapter 12, we are told that the woman, which is the church, was sought to be destroyed by the beast, the dragon, by peoples, multitudes, and tongues, and the earth, which we believe is North America, opened it up to help the woman or help the church escape from persecution so they could thrive here in North America. I believe that North America has been a grounds for the great controversy for a long time, because even before Roger Williams came to introduce the separation of church and state, the papacy came first with Spain. And how do they act towards the Native Americans? Forced conversion.
Convert or die.
Exactly. Either through the sword or through enticements. And so the enemy already had their foot here in North America before the church came, through the pilgrims. And so I think the true fulfillment of the earth opening up to helping the woman was when Roger Williams actually came to North America and introduced the concept of the separation of church and state. And in his books, he has a book called The Bloody Tenet of Persecution. He clearly states that all religions, be it atheists, be it Muslims, be it Turks, be it any religion, should be accommodated to believe the dictates of conscience. The only way for someone to be a Christian is through the preaching of the gospel. Conversion by choice, not by force. And so I think we need to restudy Roger Williams. And this is someone who Ellen White endorsed in the Great Controversy, a man that believed in religious liberty for all people. And I believe that this is what our church believed in our religious liberty positions for a long time. But today, sadly, many factions of the laity are seeking to have more of a Christian dominance role, which is very concerning.
All right. Now, I have a lot of other questions I want to ask, but that's our time for this episode. So I told you that 30 minutes is going to go like that.
Yeah.
So we thank you, Pastor or Teacher, Peter Chung, for coming and sharing with us. And we thank everyone that came and listened. But we want you to remember the true proverb: keep your heart with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life.